Oh, hello there. Today we are going to examine the consistency of errors in apraxia of speech and the updated research regarding the reliability of inconsistent speech errors as a primary characteristic. But first, what is apraxia? It is a neurological deficit in the ability to select and sequence the motor commands needed to correctly position the articulators during the voluntary production of phonemes. You can think of apraxia as a breakdown in someone's brain that is not allowing them to process how to voluntarily move their tongue, lips, teeth, or jaw into the correct position to make a sound. Apraxia is unique in the sense that there isn't an issue with a person's ability to move those articulators, rather they just can't process the steps.
Individuals with AOS typically exhibit articulation and prosodic deficits characterized by slow, labored, and halting speech, articulatory groping, and inconsistent speech errors. While inconsistent speech errors have traditionally been considered a hallmark feature of AOS, recent literature has contradicted this idea. This leads us to ask the question, are inconsistent speech errors a reliable characteristic to indicate a diagnosis of apraxia of speech?
To find out, we dove into 3 different research articles that span across childhood apraxia of speech and acquired apraxia of the speech in adults. We will share our findings with you today.
Error inconsistency has often been cited as a diagnostic marker of childhood apraxia of speech, or CAS. But more recent research conducted by Betts and Stowell-Gammon suggests that error consistency is not necessarily a defining characteristic of the disorder. The authors in this study developed a set of procedures for measuring error consistency in 5 children with developmental apraxia of speech, 5 with phonological delay, or PD, and 1 typically developing child. They suggested that if error consistency is going to be considered a diagnostic characteristic of CAS, the term must be clearly defined and there must be objective, valid measures to assess it. The researchers developed 3 formulas that measured the proportion of errors, overall consistency of error type, and the most frequently used error type across multiple repetitions of the same target word. Based on what previous research suggests, they hypothesized that children with PD would produce more consistent errors than children with CAS. However, the results of their study revealed that although the children with developmental apraxia of speech produced more errors than the children with PD, there was no significant difference in the consistency of errors produced.
Moving on, we're going to talk about a longitudinal case study, which is a fancy way of saying a study conducted over a length of time. The following study, Token-to-Token Variability in Developmental Apraxia of Speech, 3 longitudinal case studies, conducted by Thomas Marquardt, Adam Jacks, and Barbara Davis, sought to determine if there were any changes they could identify regarding the amount of phonetic variability in children's speech over a span of 3 years. To do so, they conducted a metric to measure the variability in their partner's word production during connected speech samples. 3 young males, ages 4 to 6, with differential diagnosis of developmental apraxia of speech were selected to elicit a speech sample. From the speech sample collected, the research team evaluated 4 key components: token accuracy, error token variability, target stability, and total token variability. You can think of them as opposites. Token accuracy has to do with the number of times the participant correctly produces a target word over the total amount of word production, whereas error token variability involves the number of incorrect production of words over total words produced. Target stability involves the amount of times the participant produced a target word the same, irregardless of whether it was produced correctly, versus total token variability, which involves the ratio of the number of different ways the child produced a sound over the total amount of times they said the target word. 2 key results were found from this study. The first was those with childhood apraxia of speech were characterized by a high level of total token and error token variability and low levels of word target stability and token accuracy. The second was that the level of variability and patterns of change over time differed among the participants, and the change in variability was not consistent for 2 of the 3 children.
Similar results were found in research conducted on speech error variability in adults with acquired apraxia of speech. In 2008, Schuster and Wamba conducted a study in which they analyzed error variability in 2 participants who had both suffered a single unilateral left CVA, or stroke, and were both diagnosed with severe AOS and non-fluent aphasia. The researchers elicited speech samples of single-word productions in imitation with repeated trials over several weeks. The samples were transcribed and analyzed for accuracy of production and consistency of error. The results of this study revealed both consistency and variability in the single-word productions of the participants depending on the aspect of the production that was analyzed. For example, there appeared to be more error consistency in the production of initial sounds of words and more variability in the nature of the speech production error across repeated trials. So what are the implications of all of these findings? One major clinical implication that can be drawn from these studies is that inconsistent speech errors may not necessarily indicate the presence or diagnosis of apraxia of speech, but may relate more so to the severity of the disorder. The more severely impaired speakers, both children and adults, tended to produce inconsistent speech errors at a higher rate throughout these studies. Additionally, there is a need for a standardized definition of error inconsistency and/or error variability, as well as standardized measures that can be utilized by all researchers and clinicians, making valid comparisons across all different studies possible.
While many studies revealed inconsistencies in their findings, we determined a final positive conclusion. Although inconsistent speech errors may not automatically indicate apraxia of speech, it does suggest suspected instability of the production of sounds rather than the inability. Therefore, we would not count this out completely.
As soon-to-be clinicians, what do you think about the review of literature presented to you? Would you consider inconsistent speech errors a reliable characteristic to indicate a diagnosis of apraxia of speech? What would you recommend further research to target?